Well everybody, welcome back to the channel and welcome to this supremely boring video. This is the most dull video you could ever spend your time watching because we are going to be going through Assetto Corsa force feedback and Moza pit house force feedback settings to help you get a nice force feedback with your Moza wheel in Assetto Corsa. What we talk about in this video and the ideas behind the force feedback will still also pertain to other wheels as well. I'm going to give pretty general force feedback advice, and rather than just giving you settings to copy, I'm going to explain what the settings do and why you might want to have the settings this way so that you can then understand it to set the force feedback up how you want to yourself. There's a big thing in sim racing where a lot of people copy force feedback profiles and then swear by them like some weird religion, rather than them understanding the concepts behind the force feedback and what's actually relevant to force feedback and what they should really aim for, what is good force feedback versus what is probably not good force feedback. So in this video I'm going to explain why we have things set up how we do. And having played a lot of AC recently with the Moza R12 specifically, I found these settings to actually be really quite nice settings, especially if you're driving vintage cars, which can be a little bit over the top with some of the self-aligning or some of the forces in AC. So yeah, this hopefully will be useful for those of you that really have no life but enjoy detailed force feedback. So on the screen, we'll start with AC settings and then we'll go into the pit house settings. But on the screen here, we have a content manager for Assetto Corsa and the settings for the force feedback in the controls force feedback tab. Now, for AC, if you don't know, you can change the force feedback strength for each individual car when you're in game by pushing plus and minus on your number pad. However, most cars in AC will basically, once you go to like 65% force feedback, won't clip. Most cars, even like 70% force feedback, won't clip. So if you don't want to change individual cars' force feedback and you're lazy, you could just set the overall strength to sort of 65-70%, and then you probably won't get any clipping at all with any vehicle. I like to do it from car to car, and also I like to just change the strength of cars' force feedback whilst I'm driving, depending on my mood. Now some of you might ask, how can you tell when it's clipping in game? There's a little graphic in game that shows the pedals, and it will go red and stay red if it's clipping, but you don't actually need any graphic on the screen to know if your force feedback's clipping, because when you drive, and this is with any force feedback wheel, even like T300s, even going all the way back, when you have clipping, what it feels like through the wheel is a lack of forces. So you'll be going in a corner and then you'll just get a constant continuous force that lacks any dynamic range to it. It lacks any variation. You probably won't get any vibration, or it won't go up and down in strength. You'll turn and it'll just be a solid force. Generally that's because the signal's clipping. You should always have some kind of like subtle force happening, little change in strength, vibrations, and then you'll know if you make a wheel clip on purpose and then feel how that feels like, you'll then be like, oh, that's clipping, and you'll just have a feel for it and you'll know that. So yeah, we have the gain on 100% there in AC, and then in AC you'll notice you have these effects which you can add. Curb effect, when you touch curbs it sort of does a sort of predefined rumble. I put that on a small percentage so that on some tracks where the curbs aren't that 3D, or they don't really work too much through the wheel, through the sort of physics, more direct suspension movement causing rumble, I put that on 6%. You don't really need any of this with a DD wheel, but that's a setting I have it on. I don't know why. If you've got worse wheels, you might want to turn this up, and then you get a very clear rumble for when you're on curbs, which could be quite useful. Road effect in AC, some roads might feel like they're sort of glass smooth, and for a lot of people that makes them feel really disconnected. It makes them feel like they're driving on snow, or that it's very slippy. So if you like a sort of more of a rumbly effect as you're going over the road, turning this road effect up can be quite nice in Assetto Corsa. Personally, I just keep it on 5% off and just turn it off. If you do a lot of sim racing, you'll find that those sort of vibrations that are nice and immersive They don't really help you feel what the car's doing. They're not really useful for actually driving faster or driving better. So at first, people get very excited by those kind of rumble effects. And that's why sort of true force and full force gets people really excited. Like, oh wow, I can feel the engine or the road. Oh, ABS. But actually, when you've done a lot of sim racing, you're like, those kind of forces don't really help that much. But yeah, it's worth experimenting with the road effect. You can turn it up, turn it down, see what you like. I put it on 5%, so you do get a little bit of texture through the roads. Slip effect in AC is quite nice. It's as you're going through a corner, if you're pushing the front tyres, you get a sort of vibration for that slip. It's quite a nice effect to have, to be honest, and in some ways it can feel quite similar to in real cars, especially on cut slicks and road tyres. If you push them through a corner, the carcass, when it grips and ungrips the road, it kind of vibrates and you get this kind of slip, kind of vibraty feel. And putting this on 10% in AC is quite a nice reference to know that you are really pushing the front tyres. It's not the most important of things. If you've got tactile transducers, you can use those to do slip effect as well. It's quite nice. It's quite a nice immersive effect, but you don't really need it. But worth fiddling with. I put that on a low setting just so there's a little bit of sort of vibration effect as you push through corners. And then ABS effect, again, it's another sort of rumble for when ABS is kicking in on AC. Depends how strong you want that. I put it on 10%, but it's entirely up to you. Now, AC, it also has these, since Shader Patch and Content Manager, you've got this sort of post-processing stuff, which I fiddled with a bit, and it didn't seem to really, I didn't really like it. I've not managed to get good results from that, so I've turned that off. We're not using that. And then AC, this was actually built into Assetto Corsa when it first came out, or after an update or two, has this gyroscopic effect that's basically the dynamic damping effect that you've got in ACC. I believe that's what it's supposed to be, but basically what it does is it's meant to calm the wheel down as you're going faster, and it's supposed to stop sort of aggressive oscillations. However, I have found that it can be good on like Formula cars and lighter cars, but when you play vintage cars and some road cars, it can really add in like a lot of sort of gloopiness and delayed kind of feel to the force feedback and have a pretty negative effect on the force feedback. Don't get me wrong, even with any of these settings, AC has way more detail than pretty much any other simulator for where the limit is and dynamic range. But the gyroscopic effect with older, heavier cars, I think, actually is problematic in AC. At least it is since Content Manager, or when I've used it more recently with DD wheels more recently. But worth you trying it out and seeing what you think. You can choose the strength of the damper that's applied by adjusting this setting here to make it more or less strong on damping. But I turn that off. So those are the main AC settings. However, Shader Patch also, if you go to the Shader Patch tab, has a force feedback tweaks tab. Now in the past I've not really used this because I was quite happy with AC's default force feedback and then just using wheel settings. But more recently I've started using this and I think it's quite nice. So the settings that I've got so far is that you have to enable it by clicking active. We've got this more physically accurate gyro implementation. I believe that's supposed to be doing what the Kunos gyro was originally doing, but apparently works better. You've got some custom soft lock settings you can add to it. Output real steering forces to the wheel. This seems to scale the force feedback quite nicely with different vehicles in AC. I've set this to 12 Newton meters because I'm using a Moza R12 here. I think the idea is that you set this to the wheelbase that you've got for it to actually line up with the game and the wheelbase. I don't know how much this actually lines up in reality in a literal sense, but these settings combined with what we've done in the Moza Pithouse software have actually worked out pretty well. And I do find actually with this output real forces setting, and these force feedback tweaks on, I do think you get a little bit more detail, a little bit more clarity from Assetto Corsa's force feedback. So it's worth trying these out and see what you think, as I say. Also worth saying, you do have some miscellaneous tweaks at the bottom here with some additional force feedback adjustment. Some of these things only work with very specific mod cars, and I've not really fiddled around these settings, so I can't really talk about them. But those settings that I've just shown there in AC, I found to be really quite good, especially with with vintage and modern cars that we've been driving. So it's a good start point, really. To the pit house software we go, and what's weird with the Moza pit house software is I actually find that most of the settings are pretty pointless. It's got all these options and settings, and I don't think you need to use many of them. The most important thing on the Moza pit house software is this force feedback equalizer setting. So most of the useful forces from a force feedback wheel, in terms of what's useful to actually drive a car and feel what the car's doing, most of those forces are low frequency forces, and they're the kind of forces that if you ever drive a real race car on a racetrack, especially something with downforce, but if you drive a car on a track, you'll notice the biggest thing that you're driving from is G forces and G load on your body, and that G load and how much G load you're experiencing is affected by how much grip the tyres have. If the tyres are gripping, you're feeling more and more load, and as the tyres start to slip more, the G load you're experiencing on your body decreases because the car's able to actually slip out. And then obviously in real life though, it's three-dimensional, so you can feel the rotation when you deaccelerate, when you're braking, you can feel it in all directions. Obviously with the force feedback wheel, it's very limited, so you're only going to get like lighter left and right forces basically. But those low frequency forces on a force feedback wheel, so when you're turning and the tyres start to slip, the wheel should get lighter because you're feeling that tyre slip, and it's very analogous to those real world forces. Unfortunately, most simulators do not have anywhere near the detail that Assetto Corsa has, and even more unfortunately, a lot of people just don't know what I'm talking about here. They've not used force feedback wheels enough, they've not played AC, and they also maybe haven't been in real cars to link it all together. So the low frequency forces are where most of the that's where the cheese is. It's where the butter, it's the essence, the most important thing to drive from is. So with this EQ here for the Moza pit house, you just leave all the lower frequency stuff as it is. It's fine. But you might want to turn down the higher frequency settings, because these are all sort of like high frequency vibrations and rumbles, and once you get to like 100 hertz, even 60 hertz, you're starting to get to like electric toothbrush type vibration, like really high frequency for what would come through a steering wheel. In real life, in a real life car, obviously a steering wheel doesn't tend to vibrate super high frequency. Can do from some things, like I'm not saying it never happens, but it's actually normally a little bit sort of toned down because a wheel's got inertia, and most of the stuff that's pushing the wheel is going through a whole system of rack and pinions and everything. So turning down the really high frequency stuff, you'll still feel nice details and vibrations and curbing and everything, but it will makes the wheel feel more rubbery, makes the game feel more rubbery, and makes it easier to focus on the actual forces that matter, which is the slip of the tyre through the variation in the load as you're going through a corner. But I find just turning this to 0 at 100 hertz and turning this to 50 gets you a really nice feeling with most sims, to be honest, not just AC. This probably has one of the biggest effects in terms of making things feel quite nice, and it also it basically is acting like a bit of a filter. So that is really crucial for making Mozas feel quite nice. And then another really important thing is the wheel damper setting here. So it kind of works weird in the Moza pit house software in that you turn this to 100 on this basic settings tab, turn the wheel damper to 100, and then on the advanced settings, turn the natural inertia to between 150 and 300, depending on your preference. I've got it on 200, 250 at the moment. And what you'll find is this natural inertia, I think, ties into this damper setting. And what you'll find is, if you don't have any damping or natural inertia on the Moza R12 and probably the higher strength Moza wheels or any DD wheel, what you'll find is when you've got higher strength, especially with AC, the wheel will be like overactive. So you'll get into a bit of a tank slapper and the wheel will like try and correct back, and then it's sort of oscillating. It's kind of going past where it would naturally go. The wheel's just, it's overactive. It's doing too much. A real car wheel, sometimes they can be overactive, but mostly they're actually fairly tame. Like they're normally, a real car wheel should not be throwing you off the road. Depending on car setup and geometry and the car that you're driving, some real cars are actually mental, but generally speaking, it should be helping you drive. With these settings, when you drive vintage cars in AC, you'll find that you can go into a slide, overdrive a bit, and the wheel will work with you. And for the most part, the wheel is actually staying in line with the vehicle, even correcting it nicely, and then you can drive more using your pedals rather than trying to fight the steering. It is worth saying though, if you are on lower end force feedback wheels, or just you've got weaker force feedback on your direct drive wheel, or using a weaker wheel, then you really want to, you don't want to use inertia and damping, because lower strength wheels will struggle to actually stay with the simulator, and they also won't have as much overshoot, or they won't be overactive because they're lower strength, so they're not going to be doing crazy stuff. The stronger and higher you have your force feedback, the more likely you're going to have this sort of overactive thing happening, and that's when you're going to want to start using more damper or filters on your wheel. So it's always a sort of compromise between damping, removing detail, and making the wheel calmer versus not having damping or filters and the wheel being too overactive. And the higher the strength of your force feedback, the more overactive it'll be. The higher the strength of force feedback, the more filters you can use. The lower strength of force feedback, the less overactive it'll be, and the less filtering you'll want to apply to it. It's all, as I say, it's going to be like a compromise between what you really want. The crucial thing is, force feedback should be helping you to drive. It shouldn't really be, you shouldn't be a war with the wheel. Unless you want that. I mean, you know, you can do that if you want, and it's all fun and games, isn't it? I think there's no defined rules. What is worth saying as well, dear God, if you got this far in the video, type in the comments. I really have no life, and I'm just watching a meandering talk about force feedback settings. What am I doing? What are you doing, guys? I love force feedback. I like fiddling around with this stuff. You can adjust these settings whilst you've got the game open, and you can fiddle around with the settings to then see what they do. You can do that both with the Moza Pithouse software, and you can also do that with the settings in Assetto Corsa. So if you load up AC and then you load up Content Manager again, you can then just mess around with settings whilst you're driving. And what I'd recommend is Silverstone's a really good track for testing cars because it's quite long. Or you could download a quite long. It's flat with prolonged corners. You could download like a skid pan track, and then you could try turning the car, see what the range is like for understeer, brake with a bit of steering angle, see how that feels. Try doing drifting, see how that feels. Try it with a car like the Lotus 211. Drive a Formula car, drive like a GT car, drive a road car. See what the different force feedback settings feel like with those, and adjust it. And then you get a really good framework for how the force feedback affects the vehicle, what does what, and what you like, and also what gives you the most amount of detail for what you're driving. Needless to say, I think these settings that we've just gone through here are really good foundational settings that will get you a really good natural feel for what the car's doing in the game, and be really fantastic, especially on this Moza R12 at least, and probably on the DD wheels. So hopefully you enjoyed that. I mean, how do you explain this video to people? Yeah, what did you spend your time doing? Yeah, I watched a weird bald guy in a pink shirt talk about force feedback settings for half an hour. That will get you sanctioned, really. It should do. Let me know in the comments section if you found this useful. But till the next one, guys, thank you very much for watching. Take care and goodbye.